All right, here's part 2 of Diary of an Awesome Friendly Kid. Diary of Greg Heffley by Greg Heffley's best friend, Raleigh Jefferson. Early life. Most biographies about presidents and famous people start with a chapter called Early Life. Well, the problem is that I didn't meet Greg until the 4th grade, so I don't know a lot about what happened to him before then. I've seen a few photos hanging on the walls in Greg's house, and from what I can tell, he was a regular baby. And if he did anything important when he was little, you can't really tell from the pictures. Anyway, fast forward to right before the start of 4th grade, and now this biography is going to get a lot more detailed. We used to live in a whole different state, but then my dad got a job and we had to move. My family bought a new house at the top of Surrey Street, and we moved in over the summer. The first few days, I didn't leave the house because I was scared about being in a new place. I know you are probably wondering, well, when is he going to meet Greg? But just wait, because I am getting to that part. My mom said maybe I should try to make some friends, and she even bought me a book called How to Make Friends in New Places to help me do it. The book had all kinds of things like knock-knock jokes to help a kid like me to meet new people. But the tricks in the book didn't really work on Greg. Knock-knock. Hey, I said knock-knock. Did you hear me say knock-knock? Mom, there's some weird kid at the door. Luckily, me and Greg became friends anyway. I told Greg I lived in the new house at the top of the hill, and he said that was kind of bad news for me because when our lot was empty, he planted a flag there, so now he owned my house, plus everything in it. But later on, my dad told me that wasn't true, and then he went to Greg's house to get my bike back. I'm pretty sure that's the first time my dad told me what he thought about Greg. I do not like Greg. But I like Greg a lot. He is always doing hilarious things like making me laugh right after I take a big gulp of milk. Plus, Greg is always playing wacky pranks on me, and they usually make me laugh pretty hard too. Haha, I don't get it. So I'll bet you can tell why me and Greg have been best friends since 4th grade. I even got us a locket to make it official, but Greg says those things are for girls, and that's why he won't wear his half. Well, I could probably fill up a whole book with all the zany things me and Greg do, but since this is his biography, I should probably write some stuff about his family. Greg has a mom and dad just like I do, but they are pretty regular parents, so I don't have a lot to say about them. But Greg isn't an only child like me. He's got an older brother named Roderick, who has a rock band called Loaded Diaper. Some of their songs have swears in them, so my mom and dad won't let me be at the Heffley's house when Roderick has practice. Greg also has a little brother named Manny, who is only 3. And don't ask me why, but the first time I went to Greg's for a play date, Manny randomly pulled down his pants and showed me his hiney. Now, every time I see Manny, he acts like we have this big secret or something, which makes me feel uncomfortable. Anyway, I guess that wraps up the first chapter of Greg's biography. And if you're thinking, Rowley, when are we going to get to the exciting parts? Then just wait. The time I had my first sleepover at Greg's. After me and Greg met, we had a few playdates at my house and a few playdates at his house. Oh yeah, I forgot. Greg doesn't like it when I call them playdates, so I will have to change that in the next draft or else I'm going to get whacked again. Anyway, me and Greg hung out a lot at each other's houses, but then one day he invited me to his house for a sleepover. I was pretty worried because I'd never slept away from home before. In fact, I wasn't even sleeping in my own bed yet because I was scared. I told my mom I was too nervous to stay at Greg's, but I got a little less nervous when she said I could take Carrots with me. When I got to Greg's, we played in his room for a while, but at 9 o'clock, Mrs. Heffley said it was time to go to bed, and she said we had to sleep in the basement. Well, now I was super nervous because I think basements are really creepy. As soon as Mrs. Heffley turned the lights off, Greg said he needed to tell me something important. He told me there's a half-man, half-goat that lives in the woods in our neighborhood, so I probably shouldn't go outside alone at night. Well, I was not happy to hear that news, and I really wished someone told my parents about this goat guy before we moved into the neighborhood. Anyway, the goat thing got me totally spooked, so I hid under the covers. But I think Greg got pretty spooked too, because he crawled under them with me. Then all of a sudden, there was this crazy noise right outside the window, and it sounded exactly how a half-man, half-goat would sound. Me and Greg didn't want to get eaten by this goat guy, so we got out of there as fast as we could. But we almost died anyway because we trampled each other running up the stairs. We locked ourselves in the laundry room so the goat man couldn't get us. But that's when we found out it wasn't the goat guy at all. It was just Greg's brother Roderick playing a trick on us. Okay, this next part is embarrassing, but since it's a biography, I've got to tell the whole truth. I wet my pants when we were in the basement and heard those noises outside. Mrs. Heffley gave me an extra pair of Greg's underwear, but they were too small, so my dad had to come get me and bring me home in the middle of the night. It was a long time before I was allowed to go to Greg's for another sleepover. But that's a much longer story, and I'm not even sure there's room for that one in this book. The time I saved Greg from Tevin Larkin's birthday party. There is a kid named Tevin Larkin who lives over on Speen Street, and last summer his mom invited me and Greg to Tevin's birthday party. We didn't want to go because Tevin is hyper, but both of our moms said we had to. It turned out that me and Greg were the only kids invited to Tevin's party, but we didn't know that until we got there. After we gave Tevin his presents, his mom said it was time for party activities. The first activity was to watch this movie about a guy who could turn into a bear and an eagle and a bunch of other animals. When the movie was over, Tevin wanted to watch it again, but me and Greg told Tevin's mom we didn't want to watch the movie a second time, so she said we could move on to the other activities like pin the tail on the donkey. Well, that just made Tevin mad. He got all wound up and started acting like the guy in the movie who could turn into animals. I guess Tevin's mom was used to this sort of thing, but me and Greg didn't know what we were supposed to do. We asked Mrs. Larkin if she could take us home, but she said there were still 2 hours to go in the party. So we went out the back door and waited in the yard for Tevin to calm down. But eventually, Tevin found us, and now he was acting totally nuts. I took a few steps back to get out of Tevin's way, but that's when I fell into a giant ditch. Luckily, the ditch wasn't too deep, or I probably would have broken some bones. But when I got to my feet, I heard this buzzing noise all around me. It turned out there was a hornet's nest at the bottom of the ditch, and they were all stirred up. I got stung 12 times, and 2 of the stings were inside my mouth. Mrs. Larkin drove me home early, and Greg hitched a ride too. Anyway, Greg is always saying he owes me for getting him out of that party, and I put it in this book in case I ever need to remind him. Greg's accomplishments. Every biography I've ever read for school has a chapter called Accomplishments, so I figure I better add that in here before I forget. The problem is that Greg is only a kid, and most of his accomplishments haven't happened yet. So I'll leave some blank space here, and I can fill it in later on. The time me and Greg disturbed an ancient burial ground. If you were spooked out by that goat man story from before, then you might want to skip this one. Okay, if you are still reading, remember I warned you. One time, me and Greg were playing Vikings and ninjas in the woods, and then some teenagers came by and ruined our fun. But that's not even the scary part yet, so keep reading. Me and Greg went farther back in the woods to get away from those teens. Greg said we should build a fort so if they came looking for us, we could protect ourselves. So we spent the rest of the afternoon making a fort out of sticks and logs. Greg said we should put some rocks in our fort in case things got really bad. But it was starting to get dark, and there weren't a lot of rocks lying around in the woods anyway. But then I tripped over something, and guess what? It was a big rock. I told Greg I thought I sprained my ankle, but he was a lot more worried about that rock than my injury. Greg said it wasn't a rock, it was a gravestone, and we just disturbed an ancient burial ground. I guess you already knew that was coming because it was in the title of this chapter. I'll probably change it later on so I don't give the surprise away. Anyway, me and Greg were totally spooked out by this ancient burial ground thing, and by now it was really dark out, so we were extra scared. But Greg must have totally forgot about my ankle because he took off and I couldn't keep up. I kept waiting for Greg to come back, but he never did. Luckily, my parents called Greg's house to ask where I was, and that helped him remember I was still out there. And just to show you what a great pal Greg is, he let my parents borrow his flashlight and pointed them in the right direction. An even more scary story. Okay, while I'm on the topic of scary stuff, I want to share a story about something that happened a couple years ago. One time I was at my grandpa's log cabin with my dad for the weekend, and we took a hike, and I got kind of dirty. Well, technically it's my dad's cabin now because my grandpa died the year before. I called my grandpa Bampy, and the reason I called him that is because when I was 2, I couldn't say grandpa. But when I got older and I could say grandpa, nobody would let me change it. And when my grandpa got older, it's the only word he really said. We love you, Dad. Bampy. So anyway, back to the story. After I got dirty from that hike, my dad said I had to take a shower. But Bampy's cabin is really old and it doesn't have a shower. It just has one of those creepy old-fashioned tubs. After I filled up the tub with water and got in, here's what happened next. I heard footsteps coming down the hall, and I thought it was my dad bringing me a towel or something. Then the door opened real slow, but guess what? No one was even there. I jumped out of the tub and ran around the house looking everywhere for my dad. And if you're thinking, oh, Raleigh, the door thing was your dad playing a trick on you, well, guess what? It wasn't. My dad was getting some milk at the store, and he didn't come back until like a half hour later. I told my dad what happened with the door, and he said it was probably just the wind. But I know what it was. The ghost of Bampy. Bampy. And I will stop there. Next time we'll read the time Greg played a hilarious prank on me.